My boss fired me for taking medical leave, but he didn't know who my patient was. The fluorescent lights buzzed above my head as I sat in the cold, sterile office of Dr. Martin Caldwell, CEO of Caldwell Pharmaceuticals. My fingers trembled slightly as they gripped the edge of his mahogany desk, a desk that gleamed with an almost suffocating perfection, much like the man sitting behind it. His sharp blue eyes bore into mine, but there was no warmth or understanding in them, only calculation and impatience. "You've been warned before about this kind of behavior," he said, his voice clipped and icy. "Your dedication to your work has always been questionable at best, Miss Harper. And now this? Taking medical leave under false pretenses is unacceptable." I opened my mouth to explain, but what could I say? That my medical leave wasn't for me, it was for someone else entirely? Someone who needed me more than anyone else ever had? How could I make him understand when even I struggled to believe how far I'd gone? It all started 3 weeks ago on a rainy Tuesday evening when my phone rang just as I was leaving the lab. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but something compelled me to answer anyway. It was Dr. Elena Martinez, one of the leading oncologists at St. Vincent's Hospital. Her voice was strained, bordering on desperate. "Miss Harper, we have a situation here," she began without preamble. "One of our patients, a young girl named Lily, is in critical condition. She requires immediate treatment with Synthroline X, but her insurance won't cover it, and her family can't afford it either." Synthroline X, a medication developed by none other than Caldwell Pharmaceuticals. A drug so expensive that only those with deep pockets could access its life-saving properties. My heart sank as Dr. Martinez continued, explaining that Lily had been battling leukemia since she was 6 years old. Now 12, her body was failing rapidly, and time was running out. "I know you're not supposed to get involved," Dr. Martinez added softly, "but if anyone can help us find a way, it's you." Her words echoed in my mind long after we hung up. I couldn't shake the image of Lily lying helpless in her hospital bed, fighting for every breath while bureaucrats argued over paperwork and profit margins. I thought about her parents, ordinary people working 2 jobs each just to keep food on the table, and the crushing weight of knowing their daughter might die because they couldn't pay $50,000 for a single dose of medicine. That night, sleep eluded me. Instead, I found myself scrolling through old emails from the company archives, searching for anything that might offer a loophole. Then I stumbled upon something buried deep within the files, an unused batch of Synthroline X set aside for research purposes. Technically, it belonged to Caldwell Pharmaceuticals, but technically, it hadn't been earmarked for sale yet either. If I played my cards right, maybe, just maybe, I could use it to save Lily. But doing so would mean breaking every rule I'd ever followed. It would mean lying, sneaking around, and risking everything, including my career, to do what felt right. By morning, I knew what I had to do. The next day, I walked into Caldwell Pharmaceuticals carrying a fabricated doctor's note claiming I needed emergency surgery due to complications from gallstones. No one questioned it. After all, I'd never taken a sick day in 4 years. As soon as I clocked out, I drove straight to the lab where the Synthroline X samples were stored. Security cameras lined the hallways, but I'd memorized their blind spots during late-night shifts. With trembling hands, I retrieved the vial and slipped it into my bag before heading to St. Vincent's. When I arrived, Dr. Martinez greeted me with tears in her eyes. Together, we administered the first dose to Lily, watching anxiously as the monitors tracked her vitals. Slowly, miraculously, her numbers began to stabilize. For the first time in weeks, color returned to her pale cheeks, and her breathing grew less labored. Over the next few days, I juggled my double life with increasing difficulty. By day, I pretended to recover from surgery, fielding concerned calls from coworkers and reassuring HR that I'd be back soon. By night, I visited Lily, monitoring her progress and ensuring the remaining doses were administered correctly. Each trip felt like walking a tightrope, knowing one misstep could cost me everything. Then, disaster struck. Someone noticed the missing vial. An audit revealed discrepancies in inventory logs, and suspicion quickly fell on me. After all, I was the only employee absent during the time frame in question. Before I could prepare a defense, or even decide whether defending myself was worth it, Dr. Caldwell summoned me to his office. Which brings me back to where I am now, staring across the polished expanse of his desk while he delivered his verdict. "You're fired," he said finally, leaning back in his chair with a smug expression. "Effective immediately. Pack your things and leave the premises." Shock rooted me to my seat. This couldn't be happening, not now, not when Lily still depended on me. Panic clawed at my chest as I tried to form words, any words, that might change his mind. Please, I whispered hoarsely. You don't understand. There's more to this than... No, he interrupted sharply. There isn't. You betrayed this company, Miss Harper. Whatever excuses you're about to give mean nothing compared to the damage you've caused. His dismissal stung worse than I expected, not because I cared about losing my job, but because it underscored the stark divide between morality and corporate greed. To him, I was expendable, just another cog in the machine. To Lily, though, I represented hope, life, survival. As I gathered my belongings and left the building, anger simmered beneath my grief. Anger at Coldwell for valuing profits over people. Anger at myself for thinking I could outsmart the system. But most of all, anger at the injustice of it all. Later that evening, I returned to St. Vincent's, needing to see Lily one last time. When I entered her room, she was awake, propped up against her pillows with a book balanced precariously on her lap. Her frail frame belied the strength in her smile, and for a moment, I forgot why I'd come. Hi, Miss Harper, she chirped, setting the book aside. Did you bring more medicine? My throat tightened. How could I tell her the truth? That I'd failed her? That I might never be able to provide another dose? Instead, I forced a smile and pulled up a chair beside her bed. Not today, sweetheart, I murmured, reaching for her hand. But I promise, we'll figure something out. Her brow furrowed slightly, but then she nodded, trusting me implicitly. Trusting me, despite the fact that I'd already let her down once. As I sat there, holding her small hand in mine, I realized something crucial. This wasn't over. Firing me wouldn't stop me from fighting for Lily, not as long as there was breath in my body. Somehow, someway, I would find a solution. I owed her that much. And maybe, just maybe, I owed it to myself too. Word spread quickly among the staff at St. Vincent's about my termination. Nurses stopped me in the hallway to offer condolences, while doctors muttered darkly about the ethics of pharmaceutical companies. Even Dr. Martinez seemed shaken, though she tried to hide it behind a mask of professionalism. They can't win, she told me firmly one afternoon as we stood outside Lily's room. What you did, it matters. People need to hear about this. They need to know what's really going on. I wanted to believe her, but doubt gnawed at me. What good would exposing Coldwell Pharmaceuticals do if it meant sacrificing Lily's chance at survival? Public outrage wouldn't cure her disease, nor would it magically produce more Synthroline X overnight. Still, Dr. Martinez's words lingered in my mind, planting seeds of rebellion I hadn't dared consider before. Meanwhile, Lily continued to improve, albeit slowly. Every new milestone filled me with bittersweet pride in knowing I'd helped her reach this point, but bitterness at the knowledge that her journey was far from over. Without additional doses, her recovery would stall, and the cancer would inevitably return. Desperation drove me to explore alternative avenues. Late nights became research sessions, scouring medical journals and online forums for experimental treatments or clinical trials that might offer a lifeline. During the day, I networked tirelessly, reaching out to former colleagues, industry contacts, and even rival pharmaceutical companies in hopes of securing funding or resources. Each lead proved fruitless, leaving me increasingly disheartened. Yet, through it all, Lily remained my anchor. Her unwavering optimism reminded me why I'd embarked on this mission in the first place. Despite the odds stacked against her, she refused to give up, and neither could I. One fateful evening, as I scrolled through yet another dead-end article, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. Hesitant, I answered anyway. Miss Harper, a male voice asked cautiously. This is Detective Ryan Collins with the City Police Department. We've been looking into some irregularities involving Coldwell Pharmaceuticals, and your name came up. My pulse quickened. Irregularities? Surely they couldn't mean. We believe you may have information relevant to our investigation, he continued. Would you be willing to meet tomorrow to discuss further? For a moment, fear paralyzed me. Involving law enforcement carried risks I wasn't sure I was ready to face. But then I thought of Lily, of all the Lilies out there denied access to life-saving drugs simply because they couldn't afford them. Perhaps this was the opportunity I'd been waiting for. Yes, I replied, steadying my voice. I'll meet you. The following morning, I arrived at the precinct feeling both nervous and exhilarated. Detective Collins greeted me warmly, offering coffee and a sympathetic ear as he explained the scope of their inquiry. Apparently, Caldwell Pharmaceuticals had faced scrutiny before regarding inflated drug prices and unethical practices, but concrete evidence had always eluded investigators. Until now, Collins said, sliding a folder across the table. Inside were documents detailing internal communications, financial records, and whistleblower testimonies, all pointing to systemic corruption within the company. As I flipped through the pages, shock gave way to righteous indignation. Here was proof, not just of my own innocence, but of widespread wrongdoing affecting countless lives. Suddenly, my decision to steal the Synthroline didn't feel so reckless anymore. If anything, it seemed justified. Detective Collins leaned forward, studying my reaction closely. "We need someone on the inside," he admitted. "Someone who understands how these operations work and can help us gather more evidence. Are you willing to cooperate?" Cooperate? The word sent a shiver down my spine. Cooperating meant going undercover, infiltrating the very organization that had cast me aside. It meant putting myself in harm's way, risking exposure and retaliation. But it also meant protecting Lily, and others like her, from a system designed to exploit their suffering for profit. Swallowing hard, I met Collins' gaze. "Tell me what I need to do." Detective Collins nodded, his expression a mixture of approval and caution. "This won't be easy," he warned. "You'll have to play your role convincingly, rebuild trust with Caldwell Pharmaceuticals while secretly gathering evidence. One wrong move, and you could jeopardize the entire investigation." I understood the stakes, but I also knew there was no turning back now. Lily's life depended on this. And if I succeeded, it wouldn't just be about saving her, it would be about dismantling the corrupt system that had failed so many others like her. "All right," I said firmly. "Let's do this." Over the next few days, Detective Collins and his team devised a plan to reintroduce me into Caldwell Pharmaceuticals under the guise of remorse. My termination would be reversed, ostensibly because Dr. Caldwell decided to give me a second chance. In reality, they had arranged for an anonymous tip-off, a fabricated whistleblower complaint implicating another employee, to create plausible cover for my reinstatement. The tension in my chest was nearly unbearable as I walked through the familiar glass doors of Caldwell Pharmaceuticals once again. The receptionist greeted me with surprise, and whispers rippled through the lobby as co-workers noticed my return. Some looked relieved, others seemed skeptical or even resentful. But none of their reactions mattered. All that mattered was getting close enough to uncover the truth. Dr. Caldwell summoned me to his office almost immediately. His demeanor was frosty as I entered, though there was a flicker of curiosity in his eyes. "I hope you realize how fortunate you are," he began without preamble. "After what happened, most people wouldn't get a second chance." "Yes, sir," I replied humbly, keeping my tone deferential. "I understand completely. I made a mistake, and I'm deeply sorry for any trouble I caused. I promise it won't happen again." He studied me for a moment longer before nodding curtly. "Good. You'll report directly to Mr. Harris in research and development. He'll assign you to assist with ongoing projects. Don't disappoint us." As I left his office, relief washed over me, but only briefly. The real challenge lay ahead, gaining access to sensitive information without raising suspicion. It was a delicate balancing act, one that required precision and patience. My first assignment came quickly. Mr. Harris, a stern but efficient man in his late 50s, handed me a stack of files related to Synthroline production costs. At first glance, the task seemed mundane, organizing data, cross-referencing figures, and preparing reports for senior management. But beneath the surface, these documents held secrets waiting to be unearthed. Late at night, when the lab was empty and quiet, I pored over the files, searching for discrepancies or hidden patterns. What I found chilled me to the bone. The cost of producing Synthroline was astronomically lower than its retail price, a fact deliberately obscured by layers of accounting tricks and inflated operational expenses. Worse still, internal memos revealed discussions about intentionally limiting supply to maintain high demand and drive up prices further. Each discovery fueled my resolve, but it also deepened my anger. These weren't just numbers on a page, they represented lives lost, families shattered, and futures stolen. Every dose of Synthroline X withheld from patients like Lily was a calculated decision made in boardrooms far removed from the suffering they caused. Yet, exposing the truth wasn't enough. I needed something concrete, irrefutable proof that could bring down the entire operation. That's when I remembered the secure server mentioned in one of the memos, a digital archive containing years' worth of confidential records. If I could access it, I might find everything we needed to build a case against Coldwell Pharmaceuticals. But breaking into the server would be risky, not just because of the advanced security measures in place, but because failure would mean instant exposure. Still, I couldn't afford to hesitate. Time was running out for Lily, and every day she went without treatment brought her closer to relapse. One evening, after everyone else had left for the day, I stayed behind, pretending to work late. My heart pounded as I approached the IT department, where the server room was located. A keycard swipe granted me entry, but bypassing the biometric scanner proved trickier. Fortunately, Detective Collins had provided me with a device capable of spoofing fingerprints, an invaluable tool in moments like this. Sweat dripped down my temples as I inserted the gadget and held my breath. After what felt like an eternity, the light turned green, and the door clicked open. Inside, rows of humming servers lined the walls, their blinking lights casting eerie shadows across the room. I connected my laptop to the main terminal, fingers flying over the keyboard as I navigated encrypted files and firewalls. Progress was agonizingly slow, each layer of protection more complex than the last. Just as I feared I'd been detected, a notification popped up on my screen, access granted. Elation surged through me as I began downloading critical documents onto an external drive. Emails, financial statements, strategic plans, it was all there, damning evidence of greed masquerading as innovation. For the first time since starting this mission, I allowed myself a glimmer of hope. But then, disaster struck. A sudden noise outside the server room froze me in place. Footsteps echoed down the hallway, growing louder with each passing second. Panic gripped me as I scrambled to disconnect my equipment and erase traces of my intrusion. Whoever was coming couldn't catch me here, not now, not when I was so close. Heart racing, I slipped out of the server room just as the door swung open. Standing in the doorway was none other than Dr. Coldwell himself, flanked by 2 security guards. His sharp gaze swept the area, landing briefly on me before narrowing suspiciously. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, his voice cold and accusatory. I forgot something," I stammered, clutching the external drive tightly behind my back. "I didn't think anyone else would still be here." His eyes narrowed further, clearly unconvinced. "Come with me," he ordered, gesturing toward his office. The guards moved to flank me, leaving no room for escape. As I followed them, dread coiled in my stomach. Had I been caught? Was this the end of everything I'd worked for? Inside Dr. Coldwell's office, the atmosphere was suffocating. He dismissed the guards, closing the door firmly behind them before turning to face me. "You've been acting strangely since your return," he said, pacing slowly. "Working late, asking questions you shouldn't. Now this. Care to explain?" My mind raced, searching for a plausible excuse. "I've just been trying to prove myself," I replied carefully. "After what happened, I wanted to show that I'm committed to this company. That's all." He stopped pacing, fixing me with a piercing stare. "We'll see about that." For a moment, silence hung heavy between us. Then, unexpectedly, he softened slightly, leaning against his desk with a sigh. "Look, Miss Harper," he began, his tone almost paternal. "I know you think you're doing the right thing. Maybe you are, in your own misguided way. But let me make one thing clear, loyalty matters more than anything else around here. If you can't demonstrate that, then nothing else will matter." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. Loyalty? To a corporation that valued profit over human lives? To a man who saw employees as expendable tools rather than people? Despite my revulsion, I forced a nod. "Understood, sir." He dismissed me shortly afterward, but the encounter left me shaken. Clearly, he suspected something, but how much did he know? And more importantly, how long could I keep playing this dangerous game before it all came crashing down? Back at St. Vincent's later that week, I shared my findings with Detective Collins and Dr. Martinez. Both were astonished by the extent of Coldwell Pharmaceuticals' corruption, but neither underestimated the risks involved in taking them down. "We need to proceed carefully," Collins warned. If we move too quickly, they'll destroy evidence, or worse, retaliate against you. Dr. Martinez chimed in, her voice urgent. In the meantime, we have to ensure Lily continues receiving treatment. Without Synthroline X, her condition will deteriorate rapidly. It was a sobering reminder of why I'd started this journey in the first place. No matter what happened next, Lily's well-being remained my top priority. That night, as I sat by her bedside watching her sleep, I made a silent vow. Whatever sacrifices I had to make, whatever dangers I had to face, I would see this through. For Lily. For justice. For all the lives caught in the crossfire of corporate greed. Because sometimes, doing the right thing means risking everything. And I was ready. In a daring final move, I leaked the evidence to the media, igniting a firestorm of public outrage against Caldwell Pharmaceuticals. Dr. Caldwell was arrested, and the company crumbled under the weight of lawsuits and investigations. Lily received the treatment she needed, her smile brighter than ever as her health improved. Detective Collins commended me for my bravery, but I knew the real heroes were those who fought for justice every day. Though my career in pharmaceuticals ended, I found new purpose advocating for affordable healthcare. Years later, Lily grew into a spirited young woman, her dreams no longer limited by illness or greed. She often told me I was her guardian angel, but I knew the truth, I'd simply done what anyone should have. Standing beside her at her high school graduation, I felt peace knowing our fight had changed lives. The world wasn't perfect, but it was better because people dared to stand up. And sometimes, that's enough.